Hey, fam. It's your girl, Carolina and Tessa. I get to do the intro today. Tessa's making me, haha. But no, I'm presenting especially because I decided to ask a filmmaker that I've met through the Backlot from Noam Kroll's Backlot. Shout out. And his name is Chris Heck. He is a director, filmmaker, and mischief maker. Love, love. We're all about, the mischief behind filmmaking. But he's
Mhm.
just in
And just
general,
mischief in general.
pranking. It's, a little stir in the pot here and there. We like it. We're about it. We're also about the horror genre, and we kind of get into our love for it in this episode, and what
Mhm.
and just the paths of a director, and really what's worked. Chris really gives some great advice on how to kind of just be you essentially, and you will get hired for the dream
Yeah.
positions you want in this industry. So I really love that advice, and he's just a cool, down to earth dude. And we just
Yeah.
really love this conversation, so I think you guys will enjoy it. Where are you in the world? Are you here in LA? I saw that you grew up in Vermont and did that whole cold life. We understand. I'm from Jersey. She's from Pittsburgh. So
Coasters. Yeah, I grew up in Vermont, a little town called Rutland, and spent my first 20 years there. And then I relocated to Phoenix, Arizona. I spent about 10 years there. And then I just
wow.
recently relocated to Joshua Tree. So I'm kind of right outside
Oh,
LA.
nice. I love Joshua
Ooh.
Tree.
Yeah,
I
I
also
was gonna
love like
say.
this room behind you, the whole like the decor. That's like totally my aesthetic. I love that.
thank you. Yeah,
Listeners, it's gorgeous.
when we moved in here, so we have a extra bedroom, so I kind of turned it into my office space, and I just love to be surrounded by things that inspire me. So when I'm writing or
Mhm.
creating or doing whatever I'm doing, I don't have to look far for some sort of inspiration. So I have a lot of, books and posters and, paintings and all sorts of stuff that just kind of keeps the juices flowing.
Yeah. I love that too, that it's like, you have like art that isn't necessarily like film related or whatever. I think a lot of times we get so like pigeonholed and like, well, I'm a filmmaker, so my inspiration has to come from films. And it's like not necessarily. It can come from anything. It can come from a beautiful painting. It can come from music, and I think that's a good reminder, especially when we're like have writer's block or, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
I'm
guys.
a huge proponent of that. I think a lot of
Mhm.
filmmakers can kind of get very stuck on watching films, and then the
Yeah.
stuff that they create ends up looking like films that we've seen before because that's just what they've put in the blender. So I'm
Mhm.
always trying to introduce myself to new things when I can, or different art forms or music or whatever it is. And even, one thing I love to do is find a filmmaker that I love and then try to trace back some of their influences, and then you'll start to discover, like, oh, they really loved this painter, and so this filmmaker that I was inspired by this painter. And so can I, glean something more from this painter than I am from the filmmaker? And then it becomes a little bit more your own thing, I think.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, no, that's one of our music videos that we did was from inspired by Degas' work,
Mm.
and the dancers specifically. So the costume, the romantic imperialistic era, it was all derived from that. So I love that you said that because I absolutely do that as a filmmaker and creator. And I think, as Tessa said too, it's important to be well versed and find your own unique inspiration, because we as filmmakers are told to read a lot of books on filmmaking and follow your directors and stuff, but you need to have your own like taste, I think, in art, and have something. Then you have a conversation too of something that you specifically can speak on, and have your own, because everything is your own perspective, and art is perspective, or what's the word, subjective.
Yeah.
Art is subjective, so you need to like bring your own take into that, your own opinions. And because we can see also artwork, a painting, two different ways too.
Yeah.
We can see color two different ways. Like, have
Yeah.
you ever taken those like TikTok stupid tests where it's like, do you see teal or do you see coral? Tessa and I see two different colors, which I cannot understand how that happens, but
Yeah.
it's true. So I love that you have that mindset. I want to actually keep talking about, like, I love talking about things that inspire, but give us a brief journey of who you are as a film director and where you are today. And I see that you have done work at a museum recently, so we can come back in that way, full circle. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a kid, I was very into books and video games and movies, very, big movie watching family. Not necessarily the Criterion collection, more so like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, but lots of movies all the time. And so I was always consuming a lot of stories as a kid, and then started writing and wanting to tell my own stories. And then um, got into video games a little bit, and was thinking, oh, maybe I make video games, like maybe this is how I tell
Yeah.
stories. And then when I was about 13, we got a DVD player for the first time, so that kind of gives you some perspective on my age. And and also at 13, you kind of are starting to get your own taste, and so was renting videos from like Blockbuster on my own now that weren't, what my parents wanted to see or my older
Right.
siblings and stuff, and
Mhm.
started discovering, filmmakers like, Larry Fessenden, or even like Guillermo del Toro, some of his early stuff. And then what was great with the DVD stuff was behind the scenes features. And all of a sudden my eyes opened up to, oh wow, like people make movies. Like growing up in this little town, like I had no exposure to that. I had no idea that just average people make movies. And then this whole idea of independent cinema, and like that literally just average people can pick up a camera and make a movie. So then from 13, I was like, that's it, I'm getting a camera, I want to make movies.
Oh my
And,
God, that's cool.
yeah, and so just been following that passion ever since. And when I left Vermont and moved to Arizona, a huge part of that was they had tax incentives at the time, and the industry was starting to boom a little bit there. As soon as I got there, the tax incentives went away, so that didn't work out so well.
Naturally.
I was still able to work on a lot more things there than I was able to work on in Vermont, because there's essentially no industry there, unfortunately. And so in Phoenix, I was able to start working on a lot of music videos, reality TV shows, docudramas, that kind of stuff, in all sorts of
as a director, right?
no, as all sorts
Is
of crew
that-
positions. So
Yeah, I think that's important for, filmmakers who are aspiring to be a director to
Mhm.
hear like what exactly you were, tapping into. And it was doing everything.
yeah, my career, if you can call it that, has had a bit of a sort of two-pronged.
Yes, you can call it that, Chris. Heck, come on now.
It's had a bit of a two-pronged approach. So in one path, I'm directing things, and the other path, I'm working on other people's projects. And oftentimes, working on somebody else's project, taking all the money I made from that, and then going and making my own short film, and then going back and
That's
working
so
on somebody
cool.
else's thing. And it's super valuable because, I started off in sound, then moved into camera department, production design, driving trucks, key PA, like you name it. Like I've pretty much done everything
Wow.
other than hair and makeup. And so because of that, as a director, I think one of my few, skills that I have is I can communicate with all those departments now, and I can speak their
Mhm.
language, and they also know that I've been there. So it's like, if I'm asking them to do something, it's coming from a place of like, hey, I know this is tough, but I also know we can do it, And I think, you guys have, on the acting side, I'm sure worked with a lot of directors, and like being on the crew side, I've worked with a lot of directors, and you can tell the directors who have never been on the crew before, they don't have a
Absolutely.
respect level for the crew. They don't have a respect for the work as much, it seems, and it just I feel like the project ends up suffering. So I
Yeah.
really value all of my time that I've spent in all those different departments. But at the same time, while I was doing that, was staying focused on, directing my own things and producing my own things. And luckily, those worlds have sort of started to overlap now. You mentioned the museum pieces that we did. So those were client work. So we're getting paid and getting a budget, but it's still narrative, fiction that we're creating. So
That's awesome.
finally starting to get those worlds to collide, which is pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like for most filmmakers, that's the dream, to just like, we love narrative work more, and like commercial work sometimes is just what pays the bills.
Mhm.
So it's cool to see that, like, in your trajectory, working just consistently working on the narrative stuff, but maybe not being a director at first, putting your hands on everything, all the positions that there are to independent filmmaking, and then you can start to keep growing towards where you want to be exactly. I think is really inspiring, and something I'm like trying to do as a producer actor, get to work on maybe other projects, but then it's like, then when I want to, I can hop in exactly on the roles that I'm really passionate about, because
Mhm.
we don't all want to be, all the roles all the time.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's important to know.
Yeah. And I
Yeah, I
think,
mean, we've talked about this so many times on this show of like how you really need to be familiar no matter what, like a director, it makes like it should be obvious that you need to be familiar with everything because you are directing everything. Like you're in charge of all of those different departments. But even if you are just an actor, you should still be as familiar as you can with everything because it's going to help you, it's going to help your relationship with the director, and like it just makes, you really should know as much as you can about all the different positions. We've said this so many times. But I do think it's important also that you said that, you still kept focused on what you wanted to do because, I mean, I personally know a lot of people out here that, like, for instance, they want to be actors, but they've been doing crew stuff and it's, paying their bills and people know them as crew now. And so they just keep like kind of golden handcuff situation doing the
Right.
crew stuff when that isn't even what they want to be doing. So I think it is important too that while you're learning all that stuff, you do keep that focus, like you said.
yeah, that's such an important point because people want to pigeonhole you into, it's just how we work as humans. It's like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
understand you are that, you are an actor, or you are a grip, or you are this other thing. And we're all now multi hyphenates. It's just the world that we're in order to survive. But you got to be really conscious, I think, of getting pigeonholed or pigeonholing yourself too, because oftentimes, you can kind of find a groove with a certain position and maybe it's not what you really want to be doing, but it's paying well, or the calls keep coming. So you just keep taking them. And I've certainly
Mm-hmm.
been there before. And you kind of got to remind yourself like, oh, no. What's the thing? What's the main thing that I am supposed
Mm,
to be working on, and keeping that, in the forefront. And I think we're in a really interesting time though now with social media where it's the power is so in your hands of shaping what the perception of you is, what your image is, and so if I'm going to go drive a truck for a music video for 6 days, I'm not blasting that all over my social media like, look at me, I'm the truck driver, like that's because that's not the part of me that I'm trying to promote out to the world. But if I
Right.
direct something, you better believe like you're going to see a picture of me at monitor or whatever, so that people are keeping that perception of me that I'm a director. And it's kind of amazing. I know a lot of people get frustrated with social media or don't want to do it, and I always say the power is in your hands now to shape what the perception of you is. And so just take advantage of it, because when in history has that ever been the case?
That's very
that
true.
is so true. I love that advice, because that's what I was going to ask you. Like, how do you kind of combat being pigeonholed in what has worked for you? And I think that's some really good advice. Like, just start showing that and owning, what it is that you want to be seen as
Yeah.
Yeah,
is really important.
I think especially when you're first starting out, don't worry about it too much, just take all the jobs. And I'm at a point now where I'm having to think about it more and more, especially because there was a phase maybe a year or two ago where one week I'd be a PA on a shoot, and then the next week I'd be the director, and it would be the
Mm.
same crew, and
Wow.
people's
Wow.
heads are turning like, and then the following week I'd be a PA again, and they're like, "Who is this
Right.
guy? What are you doing?" And so it starts to kind of, it can be a bit of a dilemma. So, but I think when you're
Whoa.
first starting out, just like don't worry about it too much. Just keep focused on what you're trying to do, and then you
Yeah.
get to a point though where you have to start to weigh out like, can I keep doing that? Can I keep bouncing around all these other positions, or do I need to really hone in on a certain specific thing? And that's where it comes in. You mentioned those museum projects. It's like, okay, can I still do commercial work, but I'm directing, but I'm still doing things that I'm, projects that I'm really passionate about and
Mm-hmm.
stories that I want to be telling. And so that's where that kind of came from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that if you were for people starting out too, taking, as much work as they can, like I feel like if your goal is a director, did you find that being a PA on set, did you ever try to kind of start a precedent that I really like network with that crew and just let them know like I'm really into directing though, and like kind of show director, I don't know, energy or skills set in that way? Does that make sense?
Big director energy.
A big, yeah, exactly. You said it.
Um,
Please make a meme of that, Carolina. Just do
I will. It'll happen.
yeah, you kind of got to be careful with that, because every PA wants to be the director. And so you don't want to be that guy who shows up like, yeah, I'm PAing today, but really, I'm a director. Nobody wants to
Mhm.
hear that. Nobody cares. And I'm very like, I think you should be doing the job that you're there to do, and obviously in the back of your head you're focused on whatever your goals. But if somebody hired you to be a PA or a camera assistant or whatever it is, then do that the very best that you can, and
Yeah.
that's what's going to impress people. Nobody's going to be impressed if you're trying to share your script on set but you're the PA. Like, nobody wants to have that conversation, like, because they're there to do their job. And so, but what
Mm-hmm.
does impress people is if you show up and you work really hard and you're
A good person to
right,
work with.
exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
And then,
You're chill,
2 months
good
later,
vibes. Yeah.
if you call
Mm-hmm.
them and say, hey, like, we worked together on that thing, they have a good feeling about it, you're like, I'm actually directing this other thing now, would you want to come? They feel good about working with you as a person, and they're maybe willing to take a risk with working with you as a director. But yeah, I think kind of just keep that to yourself when you're first starting out, and until you've built those relationships. But the great thing about filmmaking is you end up working with these crews over and over and over again. You start to get to know people a little bit more, and then at the wrap party maybe start talking about the project that you have coming up that you're really excited about or something like that, once you've kind
Yeah.
of built that relationship and they know that you're a good hard worker. Because I've seen PAs get fired because they were just like trying to share their script with the director on the second day or something like that. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't work that way. I think we've all heard stories of like Hollywood past where like somebody slipped a script into somebody's office. That doesn't happen. So don't try to be
Yeah.
that person.
I mean, it's a fine line, right? Because there's so much of like, you have to be confident in yourself. You have to kind of have that fake it till you make it energy. But at the same time, you got to be really humble, like people don't want to deal with annoying people. So it really is like, you've got to have good communication skills. You've got to be able to take those cues and understand when it is the right time to bring up, I'm writing this script and blah, 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 and not everybody has that, which is really difficult because there's no like black or white way to teach this to people. It's kind of just something you have to get in the moment, which is, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's more also just having the confidence that you will always be hired for you as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And the skills are just the technicalities. It's just all part of the package. That's bonus. But at the end of the day, showing up for you is always going to be the most important thing. And that's hard. That's hard to just have the confidence behind that and trust the process in that way, that okay, I will get there, but today I still need to just be me on set and show up, you know.
Yeah, that was something that, so, my first feature film that I ever worked on, I was in film school. Some guy came into the class. He was a sound mixer. He said, "Hey, anybody in here want to learn sound? You could come be a boom op for me on this feature film. You'll make nothing, but I'll teach you how to be a boom op." And I was the only person to raise my hand. I got the job. It was a horrible film, but I don't think it's even come out to this day. Yeah, it was really bad. But the experience on that, you know, I went in knowing nothing about boom opping or sound or anything like that, but was just not an asshole. Like, was a
Yeah.
nice person. I showed up on time, cracked a joke here and there. People, for whatever reason, enjoyed working with me. And then next thing you know, I'm getting all these calls like, "Hey, can you come boom op this other," like people just wanted me on set, regardless of was I an expert boom operator. No, they're like, he's going to work hard. He's going to show up and he's not an asshole. So like, I think to what your point is, focus on just being a good person and being you and showing up. And that's what people are going to remember you for, and people are going to hire you for. You're going to be in situations where you don't know what you're doing. Like when you're first starting out, still to this day, I'm in situations where I don't know what I'm doing. And of course, a bit of fake it till you make it comes into play there, but also like just humility comes in of just be open and honest and real and like, "Hey, I'm figuring this out, sorry," and you're gonna screw up, and like just be real with people and they'll be real with you, and that's what keeps them sort of coming back. And now that I'm in a position where I'm producing and I'm directing and I'm the person who's doing the hiring, that's what I'm looking for always, is who do I want around me on this shoot? Not, is that the most technically adept person? Yeah, that's important, but if they're a jerk or their energy's weird or like they joke around too much and like, then it's going to screw everything else up. So yeah, just be a decent human, I guess, is what that boils down to.
Be a decent fucking human being, guys.
Yeah, seriously, because like shoot days are stressful. Like it's so funny because this is such a career where it's like when you actually get to be on set shooting, like that's supposed to be the best part of your day ever, but then it's also like the most stressful thing ever. So it definitely helps to have people around you that actually, that just bring that good energy. Like that is such an important thing.
And I just feel like that advice translates into all departments. So yeah. I think that's what's so cool. Like as an actor, same thing. They're hiring for you. Crew, they're hiring for you. Like they're hiring you for you. So I think that's what's so cool though. Once you realize that, I think that's actually a really cool, exciting thing, because as long as you're not that annoying person, then you will keep getting work. Yeah. And so that should be like a stress off your back a little bit to think about it in terms of that way. I love that we covered that, guys. Thank you so much. Spilling the tea, Femme regard. Hi. So Chris, you're in Joshua Tree and that's like really fucking cool. Are you just getting all these like film ideas while you're there? Cause I'd be like, wow, we could just shoot something right now.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing place. We moved here just about a year ago.
I'm sorry, you keep saying we. Can you? Who's?
Oh,
we?
sorry, my lovely lady and myself, and our furry son, Pumpkin. He is a little ginger cat that we adore. So yeah, so we, and she's also in the industry. She's a model, and so with the pandemic and everything, we both were kind of like out of work. Work had halted this time last year. And we were like, well, we're kind of just sitting here doing nothing, why don't we sit somewhere else and do nothing? And we've kind of been wanting to dip our feet in LA a little bit, and but also not be in the thick of it. And we love Joshua Tree, and we had visited and stuff. And so we just kind of came out and looked at a house to rent, and the very first place we looked at, we fell in love with it, and we're like, I guess we're doing this. Yeah. So we just on a whim came out to Joshua Tree, and it is super inspiring. And especially, you guys grew up in a much different climate and environment. And when you're in
Right.
something like the desert after growing up on the East Coast, it's like just mind blowing sometimes. And so yeah, it has been definitely very inspiring. I think the next project that I'm doing, funny enough, will be taking me back to the Northeast. So I won't be shooting it out here. But it's been cool. And, I do a lot of photography and we shoot together a lot. And so it's been amazing to be able to just explore the area a little bit, especially with, COVID and everything. Like, we're not trying to go out to like restaurants and places like that, but
Right.
here with nature, it's just, there's so many places for us to explore and just be inspired. And yeah, it's been really, really amazing. And just this place that we're in has helped me focus in on writing and have the space to just be creative, I guess.
Yeah. I love that. And also, for people listening that are located in LA, where it's like so expensive to film in the city, I mean, I assume Joshua Tree is over the 30-mile zone cutoff, probably, right? Because it's like almost 2 hours away. So, that's a place if you're looking for that sort of environment, like a desert environment, or, if you have interiors that you can find out there, whatever, like that's a great idea to go outside of that 30-mile zone where it's going to be a whole lot cheaper to film and a whole lot less restrictions. But do remember, then you have to do some like gas stipends and whatever for your people. But, that's another resource that we have, right here, right around LA. So just a reminder.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those places that people get really excited about too, So if you were for the right type of project, if you're like, hey, and we're gonna go spend a week in Joshua Tree, like people get excited about that. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
cool, like because it feels like a whole different planet than LA. And so it's just like it's a little added bonus because it feels kind of like vacation land when you're here. So yeah, come out and shoot.
Adventures and all that stuff. Oh, the sun, like just the light there is so cool. Like I feel like from a cinematographer perspective, like you just get the coolest like sunsets and like the lighting and the night. You can see the stars there. So it's a magical place. I especially like right now, especially being in writing mode, because we're working on a psychological feature right now, film script idea, and like, yeah, with like just the constant noise and buzz of the city, like I much prefer to be in the woods or, in the remote desert environment. So I'm kind of jealous that you guys got to do that, pick up and move. And it's probably something I could have done too, though, if I really like wanted to. So I love that you're kind of reaping the benefits of that at the moment.
Yeah, I think, the point of your writing space and we were talking about my office and like all the tchotchkes and stuff that I have, and like my writing space is really important to me for my process. And having control over the sound and control over the environment and all that is really, really helpful for me because I kind of have ADD and I'm easily distracted. So if something else is happening, then I'm going to want to pay more attention to that than actually getting my work done. So yeah, so having this dedicated space that's nice and quiet and private, I couldn't have finished my script this year if I didn't have it, I don't think.
Yeah. It's one of those priority things, like you have to decide, is your environment what's more important to you, or is like easy access to, whatever more important to you? Like, for instance, like I'm a working actor, so like auditions and stuff, it would be tough for me to live that far away from the city, but if I were specifically a writer, like if that's what I was concentrating on, I would be out of the city in the desert for sure. So yeah, you have to decide what's most important to you. But like once you do, don't be afraid to do it. I know so many people that are afraid to move to LA from wherever they're from, are afraid to move out of LA because they've spent so much time here. Like, do do what you need to do. Don't be afraid to do that. It's not giving up. It's not, like just do what you need to do. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, I completely agree. When I was 20 and I moved to Phoenix, it was the furthest I'd ever been from home. I knew nobody there. It was kind of on a whim, and it completely changed my life, and it was that leap that just propelled me forward. And I have a fair idea of what my life would look like had I just stayed in my small hometown all these years, and it would not at all be the same. And I think
Same.
I'm
Yeah.
sure for all of us, and
Oh yeah.
people get scared. People
100%.
get scared of that stuff, but it's like, you're not gonna die. It's gonna be
Yeah.
fine. If it doesn't, give it a shot for 6 months, a year, whatever it is. If it doesn't work out, go back to whatever you were doing. Like, I think
Mhm.
people just put so much weight on trying new things. It's like, just give it a go. Life is short, but you got time. Just do it. Just try it,
Yeah.
and give it a go.
Yeah. I think one of the like best advice that I've gotten recently, and I think I've said it on the show already, but it's just like we're constantly just making mistakes. Like every decision is a mistake. So, and it's not like a negative thing. It's that we're just always going to keep making mistakes till we, finally that's what helps us
Yeah.
realign our path and helps us make decisions. Because if you're not, I think that's worse when you stop like actually taking action for things. That's a bigger mistake. That's just being
Yeah.
stagnant. So you want to make mistakes
Yeah.
because then you'll actually get to where you're supposed to be. And so that I just like always think about that now. Like it's okay. Like if you feel like you have to try this, then try it, because otherwise you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know any different.
Mhm. Yeah, I was listening to a podcast. I don't remember which one it was, but whoever they were interviewing was an actress, and she was saying she actually really likes rejection. And the interviewer was like, "Why? What is that? You're an actress. You should not." And she was like, "Because I always learn a lesson that way. I learn either what not to do or what that specific person doesn't like, or, like." She's like, it's so funny because, as actors, we face rejection all the time. Most people, I would say it's probably half and half. People either really get upset by it and they're just living in this like depression mode, or they've learned to let it just roll off their back and that's what it is. But she like not strives to be rejected, but like thrives because of that. She really learns a lesson every single time. So I'm not saying we can all be like that or should, but like I just thought that was a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, it's super difficult, especially in a creative field,
Mhm.
because we're putting so much of ourselves and our emotions and our being into, whatever it is we're doing, our performance or our art or whatever. And so for
Yes,
someone
100%.
to say, no, thank you,
Mhm.
it feels so personal. But yeah, it's something I've been working on a lot myself. Is I call it focusing on the process over the product. Because if you're
Mhm.
focused on the product, the end result of whatever it is that you're working on, then you're constantly going to be getting in your own way. But if you love the process of doing the thing and you're not worried about the product of what it's going to be,
Mhm.
that's a whole different experience. And I think what you're
Mm-hmm.
speaking to of embracing rejection, if you're in the process and you're in love with the process, then you can find the silver lining to that rejection because it is helping your process. If you're
Mhm.
focused on the product, then that rejection is earth shattering because your product is no longer worthy or whatever it may be. So I've been
Yeah.
really, really trying to focus on, my job is just to do the work and make the thing. It's everybody else's job to look at it and critique it and, decide if it's good or bad or whatever it is. But that's not any of my business because I'm already moving on
Mhm.
to working on the next thing and just making that process as good as I could possibly make it.
Yeah.
That's absolutely great for like creating a film. If you enjoyed the whole process of, and it's a long process as we know,
Mhm.
y'all, of doing it, then whatever happens, if it gets into that festival, if it makes a million sales, that's just all well and wonderful. But if you're just miserable the entire time of creating it, you'll never have the energy and the joy of to continue on to the next one, because as we know, it's not just about the next film, but it is, you want to be able to have longevity and to keep creating. And so I love that you said that, because I think as filmmakers we forget that it's it is this journey and we want to really enjoy the process a whole rather than how our film turns out, because we want it to turn out amazing, but especially if it's your first one, that might not happen, and
Right.
you have to like be okay. And so I think if you have that joy the entire time, it makes it a lot easier to move on to the next one.
Oh, hello there. I didn't see you come in. I'm Shane O'Hare of the Geekscape Games Podcast, the #1 video game podcast on the Geekscape.network. Join myself, Derek Krenevelt, and a guest every fortnight as we discuss video game news, video game reviews, and dissections. That's Geekscape Games every 2 weeks on Geekscape.net.
Yeah, I think that's probably why you see a lot of filmmakers only make one film, is because I don't know. There hasn't been anything that I've made that I haven't been disappointed with in some way or another. And I think that if you're so focused on the product, then that disappointment can be crushing. But all of those things that I've made, I've loved the process of making them. I've loved the people that I've worked with. I have great stories from what we went through. I know what I learned from making those things. And that's the stuff that propels me into making the next project. And so, but I think if I was so focused on like, oh, that short film didn't, get into Sundance and break my career or whatever, like you would just stop because you're focused on the wrong thing, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really smart. It's like finding your focus of what's important. And because in any artistic career, again, it's like your success is it's hard to measure your success like in the steps. It's like, well, okay, I've sold my first film. So, but like you're already like looking for the next, tier to jump to and stuff. And it's not objective like most careers where it's like, oh, I'm entry level. Now I'm a manager. Now, like we don't have that in the artistic careers. So yeah, focusing on really what's important to you and yeah, enjoying the process. I think that is such an important thing.
Chris, what kind of narrative work do you enjoy working on the most? Like, what's your genre? I know we're both A24 fans. So is Tessa. So like, is that your genre that you love creating most? This kind of like horror films?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's part of like sort of a lot of my self-discovery that I've been going through lately. I grew up watching a ton of horror films and loving horror films. I still love horror films. I'd say that's the #1, if you looked at my Letterboxd account, that's probably the #1 genre that I watch most consistently. And then, making my own films, I like thought I was making horror films. And other people were looking at them, or I got into this film festival and they put my short film with a romance category. And I was like, that's weird. And like in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, that is a romance, film. But I was so kind of focused on like, I make horror films. I love horror films. And I've started to realize that really fantasy is kind of my jam. And not always, sword and sandal and that kind of thing, but just some sort of element that is fantastical about the film, For instance, one of those museum films that we keep talking about that I just did was about a kid on a field trip to the Phoenix Art Museum. And as he's walking around and he's not connecting with any of the art that he's seeing, we're seeing other people connecting to the art, and we chose to show that very literally in that their costumes literally match the colors, and their body positioning is the same as the paintings and things like that. And there's even one where there's a sculpture of a hamburger, and we had 2 people standing on either side, one in a red shirt, one in a yellow shirt, and we called them ketchup and mustard. And so is that fantasy? Well, it's not reality, it's
Right.
this sort of, this other layer. So, I can work on stuff that is, very much straightforward fantasy, but then also anything that I'm working on, I'm trying to find those fantastical elements. I'm very drawn to escapism. And that's,
Mhm.
going back to when I was a kid and the stuff that I was reading and stuff that I was getting into, a lot of it was escapism, and maybe not wanting to deal with some stuff that was going on in the home life, so escaping into the books that I was reading and the movies that I was watching and the video games that I was playing. And so in creating what I am now making for another audience, that's what I want to do. I want to provide
Mhm.
some level of escape. And I love films that are hyper realistic, borderline documentary, like, but that's just not me. That's not what I want to create. So that's something that
Mhm.
I've really been finding lately from a genre standpoint, is that fantasy is really my jam. I think my work does have a romantic element to it. It might not necessarily be boy meets girl, that kind of story, but there is a level
Mhm.
of sort of romance to it. And then another thing that I've discovered is outsider stories is something that really, really interests me. Either someone who we as society might view as an outsider, or somebody who's viewing themselves as an outsider, because that's something that I've felt my whole
Ooh, I
life,
love that.
be it in my family or in my school or in my community or whatever it was. I always kind of felt a little bit apart, and I think most
Mhm.
artists do. And so I'm really trying to lean into that, and hopefully tell stories that make people who feel like they're outside feel a little bit seen and a little bit heard, and for society as a whole to maybe take a look at outsiders through a different
Mhm.
lens, maybe with a little bit more empathy.
Yeah. I like that you're using those terms like escapism and outsider stories because I feel like when we think of genre all the time, we just think of like specifically like what you would see in a bookstore, horror, romance, whatever. But like there's so many that are so like genre bending and hard to really like put specifically in a box. Like escapism, I don't think is a term I would have like ever
I
thought to use
know,
to describe,
same.
but that's so
Yeah.
perfect because like you
Mhm.
said with the museum thing, it's like it's not, like sci-fi. It's kind of fantasy, I guess, because it's not like realistic, but yeah, like that's a perfect term for that. I love that.
Because paintings are a form of escapism too. It's
Yeah.
like watching a film. Like you're visually seeing, it's supposed to take you there. That's what kind of
Hmm.
started all of this art, from way back when. And that's why we still appreciate
Yeah.
it. So I totally agree, Tessa. That is so cool that you've really narrowed down, the descriptives, descriptive
Yeah.
words for, yeah, your what you love to do. And that challenges me even as a writer filmmaker to like really like, I've definitely thought of things but not in those terms. Like I
Hmm.
love that we can be more than just what is stereotypically labeled as a genre,
Yeah.
and think of it in that way. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it helps you really narrow in a lot of
Hmm.
ways, but also
Mhm.
opens you up in a lot of ways. So,
Hmm.
you know, if I were gonna go make a war movie or a Western, let's say a Western, which is a very specific genre, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I can cross over into that as long as it still kind of has these elements of escapism. It's an outsider story. So, what does that Western look like? And now that's exciting. And it still fits my brand or my genre or the type of things that I'm interested in making, but it's also in this whole other world as well. So it kind of opens you up, I think, to like I said, I used to think of myself as a horror filmmaker, and I am going to
Hmm.
make horror films or films with horror elements to them, but that is such a narrow niche to be in. And so I think hopefully with what I've been
Yeah.
discovering about myself, it opens me up to be able to work in all sorts of different mediums and genres, but it still feels like it's all coming from the same place.
Have
I
you
love that.
seen, just to give an example, have you seen The Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night?
Yeah.
that horror
Yeah,
film, it's a
love that
Western.
movie. Yeah, totally.
I
It's
love
like
that.
a
That's,
Iranian
yeah.
spaghetti Western vampire feminist skateboarder movie.
We love
Yeah.
Yeah.
it. I love it so much. And like that's inspired one of our works too.
Mhm.
One of our shorts, guys, brace yourselves on our YouTube. You can see it. But yeah, it's I when I was researching that film, I didn't think of it as a Western at all. And then when you see that that's how the framing and how the pacing and yeah, the bad guys closing in and all of that, it's totally there. But, your first thought would have been like, oh, it's just a horror film. Like if
Yeah.
saw it for just face value there. So I just think that's what it's fun that, it's, you don't have to think of genre as just like what it stereotypically is. So a Western doesn't necessarily have to be this thing in the desert, or it can be, and it can still be like a love story,
Mhm.
or, whatever
Yeah.
you want it to be.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
really interested in archetypes and sort of genre traditions and things like that, and then being able to like really examine those things and flip them on their head a little bit. And I think that's what they did, Spectre Vision, with that film. And like, you know,
I love that you saw it. I had a feeling. I was like, he's seen this.
Yeah.
You're a horror fan.
if it's dark
Mhm.
and weird, I've probably seen it. But I think, we're in a place now where people are really hungry for those genre bending films. You look at something
Mhm.
even like Hereditary, like
Mhm.
it's a family drama, like it's a heart-wrenching family drama that has these
Mhm.
insanely scary moments, packed into it as well. And so that's what's really fascinating, I think, about where we are in film right now, is you can really start to flip some genres or mash some genres together, and people are open to it and excited about it.
Yeah, definitely. It's like it's an exciting time for creators.
Yeah. I love that in Ari Aster's interview about Hereditary, I was listening to him say, and I guess people were like trying to say that, yeah, it wasn't a horror film. And he's like, no, it was a horror film. But it's funny because I think a lot of people saw that family drama element more, which he probably wasn't anticipating to really like pull through. But those performances really gave that, that other like color to it than than just a horror film. And that's why I love it so much,
Mhm.
because I'm kind of more drawn to these stronger narrative like arcs in the relationships of the characters when I'm watching a horror film. Because I mean, I'm down for a good old slasher anytime, whatever, but it's fun to have that stronger pull, into the what the characters are facing and
Mhm.
feeling.
Well, I think what was
Yeah.
important with that, and a lot of like the horror, especially that we see from A24 in particular, like you're talking about, is it's filmmakers who take the genre
Mm-hmm.
seriously. And so they're trying to make an important film. They're trying to tell an important story. Like I'm
Mhm.
excited to see more horror films winning Oscars. Not for the prestige, but for the fact that it's, the thought and the care has been put into these genre films, and they're not just,
Yep.
$5 bargain bin, let's just churn these things out. I've had a lot of
Right.
producers kind of approaching me about, hey, we can give you this little budget if you put 5 teenagers in a house and kill them. And I'm like, yeah, I can't, I'm not bringing anything to that, like
Yeah.
that's not pushing the genre forward. And I think you hear that argument a lot, like, oh, that's not really a horror film, or like you hear it with like Get Out, for instance. Oh, that's not
Mhm.
really a horror film. And it's like, I think that's because people think of the genre as cheap and less than, and this like other thing. And it
Yep.
doesn't have
Yeah.
to be, and it shouldn't be, and it hasn't always been. And so, if you look back 100 years before now, the films that we remember are Nosferatu, Dr. Caligari.
Psycho.
It's the horror films
Like
that,
I think,
have,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's the films that have stayed with us over the years have been the horror films, because they can have an impact and they can cross genres more than any other type of film can, I think. And so I'm excited because
Yeah.
I think we're in this phase where a lot of filmmakers are taking horror really seriously and making extremely quality films that are in the horror
Yes, that's what
genre.
I'm trying to do, because it's
Yeah.
our film's not just a psychological thriller, it's also a horror, but I wanted I wasn't I was very careful when I was having brainstorm sessions with Tessa to not just be like, okay, we just like it's not going to just be a gory moment or, just for that stereotypical like shock factor.
The
Like
shock
there
factor,
has to
yeah.
be some really symbolic, or there's the action is justified for a specific part of the story. And mine is really like kind of more of a relationship story. I think that's what I'm starting to realize my go-to genre is really focuses on like relationships and the good and the bad of them. So but it's set in this modern futuristic world that you would think it's supposed to be this weird sci-fi thing, but it's not. That's the world it's in. So I'm trying to play with that, and I'm really drawn to those stories too. So I love that how you defined that that's where horror is going, and I feel like that's my mission too as a filmmaker, to really push it in that way, because I love that genre, and it's not, they're real stories based on, there's horrifying real stories there. That's why we create them, because we do experience them in our real life.
Yeah.
So it's not some like cheap ticket for sure.
Yeah, and I think that, if even just looking at the history of storytelling, fear has been a tool, a device that has been used since cave days, to get a point across and to convey something. And if you look at the more recent trends of horror films, they're always dealing with what's going on in our society. It wasn't a coincidence that like the torture porn films of like Saw and Hostel and all that sort of stuff came about at the same time that we were seeing videos of Al Qaeda cutting people's heads off on the news. Like that's not a coincidence that those things were happening, or that Godzilla movies are coming out during like after nuclear war happened, and now we're getting these deformed, and like it's always a commentary on where we're at in society. I think so much more than any other genre does. Like horror is always right on the precipice of what's happening right now, and examining it and putting it back in our faces of like, hey, you need to look at this, you need to look at what's going on. Get Out is a great example of like, he's talking about racism, but he's coming at it from this totally other angle that we're not talking about, of the, the tokenizing of Black culture and, all these, it's this whole thing that like, it was just under the surface and nobody was really talking about it. And he's like, here's a horror film that you can go and just watch and have fun, but it's going to make you think a little bit as well.
Yeah.
And I can't think of another genre that can talk about the real world in the same way that
yes,
horror
I
can.
love it. It gets me really excited
so
talking
true.
about this stuff. I'm like, yes, because I'm such a we're all, I think, such fans of the genre, and I think it's because we see it in this way, and like that is just it's so important. And I'm getting my boyfriend into it, like slowly. He loved Hereditary. I just showed him that. And I think I think when you kind of open the eyes of also because there's a lot of bad horror films out there too. But if you start to showcase like these kind of deeper, like ones that really kind of touch in on different things, then it's really exciting to see like, oh, okay, I get the scare now. Like I get where, it's kind of enjoyable from this aspect now. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, Chris, to wrap up, let our listeners know where they can find you, where they can find your work, how they follow you on social media.
Yeah, Instagram is sort of my most active spot. My username is chrisek13. Also my website, you can see all my work there, chrisek13.com. Those are kind of the best places for now.
Perfect. Is 13 just your favorite number, or?
Yeah, a little bit. I have a production company called Theater 13, and I think it kind of all, speaks to, there's sort of a supernatural element to everything that I do and create and am interested in. And so, yeah, it's kind of become my
Is that why you
signature
call
number.
yourself a mischief maker
Nice.
as well?
Love it.
It's just kind of like your tagline.
Yeah. I'm a big prankster, a big joker. So I don't like to take myself too seriously. So yeah, so on my website and everything, it says writer, director, mischief maker. I think that's also just kind of filmmaking, or at least my approach to filmmaking is getting into some trouble, and taking some risks, and let's try a thing. Let's stir the pot up a
I
little bit.
love
So
it. I love it.
Love that.
Chris, it's been such a pleasure. I feel like we can talk shop all day about this kind of stuff. I love talking about the horror genre and so definitely want to keep in touch with what you got going on. It's been a lovely, fun chat for sure.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It definitely was cool catching up, and I'm really looking forward to your film that you're working on, and we can't wait to hear more about it. So keep me in the loop, please.
Thanks for listening to Femme Regard Podcast. If you like what you hear, tune in every Friday for more tips on the filmmaking business and insightful conversations with industry professionals.
We can only grow with your support, so please subscribe, share, rate, and review. You can also join the Femme Fam on Patreon. For more on us, check us out at femregard.com.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network.